Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Andrea Bushnell, the Chief Executive Officer at North Carolina Realtors. I'm excited to share that today we will be taking a deep dive into a current market update and economic forecast. We know how important this update is for all of you realtors and are excited to have 1,000 of you joining us live today. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we will be recording today's session, and we will email a link of the recording directly to each of you so that you can rewatch today's session or you can share it with others. I'd like to now welcome and turn things over to our current 2021 NC Realtors President, Kelly Marks.
Thank you, Andrea. And look, good afternoon, everyone. You know, we have a lot of ground to cover in today's session, including discussing developments in the housing market, a forecast of the direction of home prices, and a comparison with past housing cycles and what this all means for our industry. You know, last year we were honored to have Dr. Lawrence Yun, who's the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Research at the National Association of Realtors, provide us with a presentation. And now at the time, it really helped us better understand what was going to be happening with our industry during the COVID. And I must say that he was absolutely correct with analysis in the spring market coming to light, if you will, in late June, July, August, September. And needless to say, he's been so right for so long. And we're so happy to have him here representing us, but also representing us across all the news outlets across the country that appears on with CNN and all the other broadcasts. So with that, I'd like to certainly introduce Dr. Lawrence Yun. Everybody knows Dr. Lawrence Yun, and if you don't, just know he's the man. And we're not going to go with the 5-minute bio because Lawrence, so many of the people who are on here have certainly heard it before. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're excited to hear your presentation and how it's going to make us better and more informed to be able to convey the information to our clients.
Thank you, President Kelly Marks, for inviting me to participate at the North Carolina Realtors event. And certainly, it's one of the most unique states, I would say, in terms of geography. I mean, you go from the Outer Banks, and then you have the Greensboro, always an exciting time, I guess, in March period when you have that ACC basketball tournament. And then fast-growing areas of the Triangle, Charlotte, and all the way to the mountains, beautiful areas of Asheville and Murphy, North Carolina, which I have been. I think many of you have not. You should visit. It's part of your state, but it will be a very, very long drive. So I think I know the states reasonably well. Also, having grown up in South Carolina, or I should say my parents still live there, and from DC, going through 95, I know that highway very well. So thank you again for inviting me to share some of my thoughts about the housing market, commercial real estate market conditions, and what a development. March 2020, coronavirus, completely unknown. We were unsure what happens. First, you touch a doorknob, accidentally touch your face. Well, is that a death sentence? Because at that time, if you remember, they said, don't touch your face at all once you go outside. Also, a lot of questions raised from the media. Are we going to face another foreclosure crisis after the harsh subprime lending collapse that happened back in 2008 all the way to 2010 period? But what a remarkable recovery, and then some once the economy reopened. When the economy reopened, one of the things that consumers were eyeballing was falling mortgage rates and continuing to fall mortgage rates, such that mortgage rate reached an all-time low in the US ever, 2.7% by December and January. So home sales were clicking very, very high. Now, as an economist, I speak better with the slides. So let me put that onto the screen to illustrate the key points. Hold 1 second as I upload it onto the screen. So this is the home sales chart that I was referring to. So one can say before the pandemic, sales went up a bit, down a bit, but nothing meaningful. I mean, there's always slight increases and slight decreases, but you see the dramatic drop in March, April, May period, then slowly coming out, and then boom, exceeding the sales above the pre-pandemic, which was the reason why you had a very busy time throughout the late last year and early part of this year. But note that the home sales, all the way through March, April, we are seeing sales beginning to weaken a bit compared to what it had been. Let me clarify. Sales are still above pre-pandemic. So you compare to pre-pandemic, it is up. But it is up less strongly, only about 5 or 10% above the pre-pandemic compared to 20, 25% above activity back in the autumn months of last year. So a slight topping off pattern. When we see the builder activity, home builders, new home sale, newly constructed, we're not seeing any weakening in the home builder activity. Whatever they build, they're easily able to sell. I know that there are major challenges on the material costs, complete price shock on the lumber prices. Yet, as they relay this information to the consumers, consumers are willing to pay higher price accounting for all these expensive material costs. So even though the builders were initially shocked by the high prices, whatever they are able to produce, they can pass on those higher costs to the consumers, and consumers are still buying. But the new home sales are about 10, 15% of the market. The 85, 90% of home sales are through the MLS, what the realtors engage in. Now, the builders are a little tricky. Sometimes they say to the realtors, please bring your clients, and here's the commission we will be paying as you bring your clients. Right now, the builders are playing a little cat and mouse game. Some builders still offering that. Other builders are saying housing market is so strong, we don't need any realtor assistance. They're gonna sell it on their own. It's a pity that they are changing mind depending upon the market cycle, but whatever the builders build also means that there is a potential more listing for realtors in a way of chain reaction. So builders build it. Generally, it's more expensive home, larger size home. So people are trading up to that property. As they are trading up, they are releasing their old home into the MLS, and that's where the realtors would conduct their business. So we need more building activity to relieve the inventory crunch that has been facing across North Carolina. And one concerning sign is that this is the mortgage application to buy a home. So it's not a mortgage approval, but just people applying for mortgages to say, I need a mortgage to buy a home. It's not a refinance, so we are excluding refinance. And the red line essentially is the pre-pandemic. So one see the dip during the lockdown, then coming out at once the economy reopened, staying above the pre-pandemic, but note that in the recent weeks, it's beginning to slide below the pre-pandemic. Now, part of that could be due to the fact that given the multiple offer situation, those who can buy home using cash are using cash, and cash offers would be completely out of this data. Other people are temporarily draining down their retirement savings, and again, using the cash to buy a home in this competitive environment. So sliding down on the mortgage application could be a sign that more people are using cash in order to make transactions. In the vacation resort areas of Asheville, Outer Banks, certainly these are more wealthier households, and maybe given the stock market has been bouncing off all-time high, they are selling their stocks to buy home all cash. Now, why are the sales beginning to show topping off? And it could be this chart. Record low inventory. I saw some data from the Triangle region as well as Charlotte. The inventories are down 50% from 1 year ago. I mean, these are incredible large decline. So record low inventory is hindering some of the sales activity. Recently, I had a meeting with many brokers across the country. And in that discussion, I simply raised a very simple question. If you had 20% more inventory in your market, would you have 20% more home sales? And everyone said, yes, of course, that's an easy thing. So the home sales beginning to show topping off. It is topping off because of lack of inventory. Simply, if we had more inventory, we can conduct more business. It is the inventory constraint that is holding back. Also, use this chart for any clients who are concerned about the housing market bubble. It's a natural question because they don't want to buy on the peak or they don't want to buy where prices could potentially decline. And the current Google search, one of the top Google search phrases are we in a housing market bubble? Well, this chart shows that we are in a housing shortage. Back when we had the price decline in 08, 09, you see that inventory levels were essentially 4 or 5 times above the today's level. So this chart in itself should satisfy that housing, at least regarding to the prices, are on very solid ground. And other fundamentals are that we don't have those risky subprime lending. Today, people who need to buy a home, they're buying either cash or they need to meet strict underwriting criteria. So certainly not the condition. And with the jobs recovering, that's an added strength to the housing market. Where are the inventory declining? Well, here's the changes based on price category. So at the starter home market, maybe in some of the rural community, you still have homes, say, priced under 100,000, but essentially there's virtually nothing available under 100,000 in the key markets like the Raleigh area or Charlotte because prices have risen just so much. But if you look at the second price category, 100 to 250, this would be a key starter home market and the inventories are down significantly. So the starter home market is very, very challenging conditions. Then as you move up the price scale, inventory declines are less severe. And in fact, on $1 million plus, there's actually more homes listed now compared to 1 year ago. So where are the sales happening given that these are the inventory situation? The pattern is that homes sales are not clicking where there is no inventory, and home sales are able to click along where there is inventory or less severe decline. $1 million plus. I mean, say 10 years ago, it was very difficult to find, say, $1 million home in the Charlotte region, but now they're seeing, a decent amount of $1 million property, and it is increasing 80% in terms of transaction. So hypothetically, say there was 100 sales of $1 million 1 year. Now you are doing 180 sales, 80% increase on $1 million plus. Where there is inventory or less severe, sales are clicking along, and where there is a significant inventory decline, the sales simply cannot occur. And that's what you see on this chart, which imply that housing market topping off, at least the sales topping off. Prices are not topping off. Prices are hitting records. Sales topping off is due to lack of inventory. Why do we have this housing shortage? Well, this is the housing starts or new home construction from long, long time ago, 1960s, probably before many of you were actually born. And what you see on this chart is that in some years, it's slightly under historical average. The red horizontal line is the historical average. And other years is above, showing that housing market goes through cycles, little decline, little up, it moves. But look what has happened over the past 15 years. For 15 consecutive years, America has been underproducing. Whether you can say excessive regulation, especially related to the land use and water usage, and also due to the difficulty of getting construction workers, and some small-time builders having gone bankruptcy during the foreclosure crisis, and they never came on back on, so we don't get that extra home building. But you see that we have been under production for 15 years, and that is why we are facing housing shortage. The final two red bar is my projection as what's going to happen this year and next year. we will exceed the historical average, but by a small amount. And it is insufficient to make up for the shortfall that we experienced in the recent 15 years. So at least we are moving in the right direction, but we will not relieve this housing shortage anytime soon. But what I can say is you will begin to see a little more inventory towards autumn. I know in autumn, things begin to naturally slow down a bit, but I think this is when we'll get more building activity that leads to completion, because housing starts are beginning to rise, but it takes about 5 to 8 months to complete it. And so some inventory will show up, not to fully relieve the inventory, but at least moving in the right direction. But the concern for the buyers is that as they wait, mortgage rate may rise. So you may say it could be less heated condition or more inventory choices in autumn, December, but one may be facing higher mortgage rates. Red line is the mortgage rates. So you see the steady decline, which was the key reason for the upsurge in the home sales. But we have already hit the bottom and now beginning to show an increase. So your clients who purchase home in November, December period, say to them, congratulations, you got the absolutely low mortgage rates. But for your current clients, don't expect they're gonna face 2.7%. Current mortgage rates are around 3%, 3.1 on average, and maybe by December, it may even hit 3.5%. So why do I have a projection of rising mortgage rates? Well, let's turn to the green line. So what is the green line? Green line is what you see on the financial news. Federal Reserve is not going to raise interest rates, or Federal Reserve is considering raising interest rate, but that green line is what they're referring to. And the Federal Reserve currently is all in, maximum liquidity. They have reduced their interest rate, something called Fed funds rate, down to zero, and it is remaining at zero. And they're saying that they will not raise the green line probably for the next 18 months or even 24 months. So it's a maximum liquidity policy. Yet mortgage rates are rising already. So what's going on? Well, the middle line, the blue line, is the 10-year Treasury yield. This is what the US government needs to pay in interest rate to borrow money. And we are facing rising budget deficit, highest national debt, partly financed by printing of the money. And also the next stimulus or next government spending program would be something on infrastructure, clearly needed, to fix up the highways, bridges, and that people are discussing. Should it include some funding for housing? Say repurposing some of the dilapidated housing into more livable units, or even subsidizing building of new homes. So people are considering whether the infrastructure should include that. Other people are debating how much of it should be a green energy component. So as they debate, but one part is that means also more higher budget deficit. So we need to fix highways, bridges, and maybe we need to subsidize some of the home construction, but larger budget deficit means that people who are buying US government bond is saying, look, I'm getting a little nervous. Only way I'm gonna buy US Treasury bond is you have to pay me a little higher interest rate. So when the blue line rises, automatically the red line would also rise. And that's why I think the mortgage rate is headed up even more, possibly 3.5%. Now step back, take a deep breather and say 3.5% mortgage rate, is that damaging? And you say, wow, 3.5%, these are extremely attractive rates. So clearly it is still very favorable, even though it is off the record bottom conditions. Another concern is that consumer prices are beginning to rise. And why is this important for the housing market? Because 1970s clearly demonstrated that when the inflation begins to pop out, millennial generation have no idea what it is. But what happened in the 1970s is that when you went to the grocery store, every time you went, things were more expensive. Everything was rising roughly 10% a year. And when there is an inflation, mortgage rate tends to be much higher because the money that is returned back to the bank would have lost in value. So the bankers say, look, if I'm going to lend you the money, and the money that you return to me would have lost in value, well, I'm not going to lend it unless I charge you 15% interest rate. And that is why people remember back in the 1970s, mortgage rates were 13%, 14%, 15%. Now, we will not return to the 1970s style 10% inflation, but we may get higher than normal inflation. Economists would consider 2% inflation as the top inflation level. Right now, it is at 4%. Charlie Opler, NAR president, had a meeting with the White House staff and raised this issue. Are you concerned with inflation? And the White House indicated, no, we're not concerned because today we have 4% inflation, but last year was 0. And if you average 0 and 4, that is 2%. So we are still within the normal range. We are not concerned. And we think that inflation rate will steadily decelerate and not be a major concern. But nonetheless, when the inflation occurs, it just means it's hitting the pocketbooks. So let's see which prices are rising and declining. This is comparing the most recent data versus pre-pandemic February 2020. So even though the air travel appears to be coming back, it is still a bit cheaper compared to pre-pandemic. Clothes is cheaper. Motor vehicle insurance is a tad lower. So if you need to renew your auto insurance and they're quoting you a little high, say, oh, I'm going to check with my competitor because it should be slightly lower. College tuition. We know that college tuition generally rises, but maybe many of the major universities felt a little guilty about online schooling last year. So far, there is a minimal increase in college tuition on average. The renter's rent is rising about 2.3%. So if you are investors charging rent, that's the national average, 2.3% growth. Meat. If you are meat eater, you are angry, rising very fast. Your clients, they bought a home, they're very happy. Now they want to get a refrigerator. Advice, it's going to be expensive. Appliances are rising. Some of the domestic travel has returned. So hotel and motel stay is actually charging now pretty much normal rates, or even a little higher compared to pre-pandemic. Gasoline, 5-year high. And we know that the realtors spend more on gasoline compared to the rest of the population. So it is pinching the pocketbook immediately. Let me focus your attention to the yellow highlighted areas. New cars are much more expensive than used cars, but the price increases are happening on the used car, which is implying that there is still some degree of financial anxiety among middle-class Americans. We know there's large degree of stimulus package, the unemployment insurance, generous unemployment insurance, but this is still implying that if people need to buy a car, they're looking towards used car rather than new car, because obviously if they feel comfortable, they will buy new car, but there's still some degree of financial anxiety and people are turning to used car. Home prices are off the chart, but believe it or not, government doesn't include that in the consumer price inflation. So when you hear the report, consumer prices rose a certain amount, it doesn't include home prices. I will not go into it, but it's not included in the prices. But I think more inflation will potentially be along the way or remain stubbornly high at around 4%, because the pipeline price pressure is still rising. This is for construction material, and you can see it is still rising. And whether it is the drywall materials or nails, everything that related to construction materials. So the prices are rising, and even other producer prices are rising, and therefore that will filter into the in consumer prices. The rents, I mentioned the rents are rising now at 2%, but this is lower than 4% rent increases that were occurring before the pandemic. But the rents, I believe, will soon go above 4%. So it's been decelerating, but it's now ready to begin to inch higher. So why do I believe that the rents will begin to inch higher? And if the rents begin to inch higher, it also means overall consumer price inflation will be elevated again another stubborn factor as to why the inflation may not go back down in any near future. The rents, I believe, will go back up to 4% or even higher because we are seeing the demand for rental housing unit begin to recover. This is the number of rental households. It collapsed during the pandemic. Many young adults working at a restaurant, working at a hotel, went straight to parents' basement when they lost a job. But once, as the economy is now generating jobs and more people are getting vaccinated, or at least we appears to be getting back to normal, the rental demand is beginning to recover. So as the rental demand is recovering, it just means automatically this rent will soon be turning positive. So expect rents to also contribute to the overall consumer inflation, which means that that will put upward pressure on mortgage rates. Mortgage rate prediction, again, I think it may hit 3.5% by the end of this year. I could be wrong, but that's what all the indications are implying. Let me now turn to the job market and then wrap it up with a quick forecast. So this is the US job market. So what you see is the red line is, I just put it there as a reference point for year 2000. And it just happened to coincide with 2010 when we had a foreclosure crisis. And then the lockdown period of the pandemic. So as you can see, we are not back fully up yet. If we look at the North Carolina, what you see is very similar pattern. Year 2000, then year 2010, the foreclosure crisis. But note that in recent years, you are comfortably above the red line. So let me go back to the US, then North Carolina, which is implying that North Carolina job growth has been stronger compared to the rest of the country. But also note that you are not fully back up to the pre-pandemic levels in terms of jobs. Then you go to markets like Charlotte, comfortably above the red line. Again, very fast growth in the Charlotte, Gastonia metro market. And here's an interesting, the top line is the Raleigh area, while the bottom one is the Greensboro. Greensboro, furniture business, it really got the strong disruption and hard to restart. But the Raleigh area with both the state government along with the many technology companies coming in, you can see back in the year 2000, employment level between two metro markets were different, but only by small amount. But look how it has widened in recent times. So, some metro markets doing much better compared to others. But maybe this is a sign that as Raleigh becomes too expensive or Charlotte becomes too expensive, people begin to say, well, Greensboro offers much better affordability. And maybe people begin to consider Greensboro, or other companies as they're beginning to consider expansion. They say, well, let's go into the region where people can buy home. It's becoming more difficult to buy home in Charlotte or in Raleigh area. Now, North Carolina has an advantage in terms of Charlotte and Raleigh is still much more affordable compared to Boston, compared to Washington, D.C., compared to many California markets. So as many companies are coming in, they're coming in from these areas. So even Charlotte and Raleigh, by out-of-state consideration, is still affordable. But within state, maybe people will consider places like Fayetteville, places like Greensboro, where we are beginning to see larger price gap compared to, say, Charlotte and Raleigh. This is a 50-state recent job comparison before pandemic and the latest job. North Carolina, minus 3.0. So you are doing actually a little better than the rest of the country. Minus 3.0 just means that overall job market, you are down 3% compared to 1 year before. You go to New York, they're down 8.7% because Governor Cuomo had a very restrictive lockdown and for longer period, and hence it hurt the economy. Oh, of course, the purpose was to contain the virus. So the New York area down much more significantly. Then you go to the western states, and there's two orange color states, Idaho and Utah. These are the only two states currently with more jobs compared to 1 year ago. Then you see the big state like Texas, same thing as in North Carolina, down 3%. Florida is more tourism dependent. So, tourism really did not kick in. So they're down about 4.8%, but you see the variation that is happening across the country. North Carolina doing relatively better compared to other states. So the job market is not fully back up. North Carolina is not fully back up, but believe it or not, we have more job openings than before the pandemic. I don't know about your areas, but when I walk around Washington, D.C., or where I am currently, Arlington, Virginia, I see help wanted sign everywhere. And one can say those are low industry wages. Cashier for 7-Eleven, they're looking for help at a restaurant. So you can say those are more beginning level job, but overall job openings are at a record high. And many construction companies will also say they are hiring, but it's really hard, difficult to hire. The reasoning is that the generous unemployment benefits, is that people are still afraid of the COVID. Now, what is the reasoning behind it? But right now, America has more job openings now compared to any time in the past. Forecast, home sales. Job market is recovering. Mortgage rate has been favorable. So the first quarter, home sales were up 12, 13% from 1 year before. Some local market variation there is. Second quarter would be massively higher, 40% increase above 1 year ago, but it is somewhat artificial comparison because we are comparing with the lockdown of last year. Third quarter will be about the same. So you were kind of busy last autumn. So this is implying that you will probably match up with that activity. But by the fourth quarter, sales will actually come down. And the reasoning is high prices squeezing out some buyers and also rising mortgage rates. So if I am wrong on mortgage rate, the sales will be better, but the rising mortgage rate will also begin to squeeze away the buyers. We will have more inventory. Builders are building more, but some of the buyers will simply be priced out of the market. So if you believe that this is a reasonable forecast, what you see in 2021 is the following. Home sales will be comfortably higher than last year. Another way to put it is, last year, we missed 2-3 months of home sales because of the lockdown. But this year, we have 12 months of home sales, and that's why it's better. I know some of the realtors are panicking. I don't have a listing, but you know that if you had a listing, sales are clicking along. So overall unit sales, I think this year for most people will say, yeah, I'm actually doing a little better business this year compared to last year, even though you are facing that tremendous anxiety once you completed the deal. Now looking for the next listing is simply difficult to get that next listing, but more overall business activity. And my final chart is this chart. Even though the job market is recovering, office leasing is not happening, or whatever new office leasing is being offset by people leaving offices. So the net absorption on offices are continuing to decline. This is due to the fact that many business executives simply do not know what the new economy will look like. There are a lot of trial and errors because office workers have demonstrated they can work from home, which is also the reason why the home sales in the Outer Banks or Asheville, North Carolina are doing very well, because people are saying, if I can work from home, I can also work from vacation home. So vacation home market has really picked up from this trend of ability to be work away from office. It's doubtful that we will return to 5 days a week, come to office. Most likely would be some kind of hybrid model. Come to office 2 or 3 days a week, but other time work from home. If that's the case, say again, Raleigh Triangle region, home prices are very expensive. But if one consider the next county and the next county over, supply is beginning to show up in those markets and it's much more affordable. So one way to get the affordability is move to consider the next county, and at least for office workers, they can consider that, knowing they don't have to worry too much about commuting. So very interesting development. And also some of the big technology companies like Twitter, without going into the free speech debate, Twitter is closing down their San Francisco office and saying to their workers, you can work from home anywhere in the US or anywhere across the globe. And some people may say, look, I want to go to North Carolina. It's much cheaper there. Or maybe they grew up in North Carolina and now working in San Francisco, and they say, no, I want to raise family in North Carolina. I remember the joyous memories back then. So all this work from home phenomena could completely change some of the dynamics of home buying. So please be mindful of it. And I would say overall, North Carolina will benefit, but also the more beneficial area within North Carolina is areas where homes are more affordable compared to, say, nearby big metro cities. Thank you for listening, and thanks for the opportunity. Now I'm going to turn it back over to, I guess, President Kelly Marks.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Actually, this is Andrea. On behalf of our 53,000 North Carolina Realtor members, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your leadership. We appreciate your guidance and explaining where our industry is currently and where we might expect it to be in the future. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we will see you again soon.